Clap, clap, clap. Okay, cool. So, hi, Mark.
Good morning.
Yeah. Thank you for joining me. So, I met Mark yesterday in a coffee shop. And the night before, I started an online challenge to keep myself accountable on being online. And so I thought it was quite coincidental that we met. And yeah, we had a chat yesterday. And now I've asked him, and he's kindly accepted to a little chat, just some more questions that I have. And yeah, the goal is just to raise awareness to digital and social media consumption, but also overconsumption. And yeah, Mark will tell a bit about himself, but just a quick one. Mark is a online coach, mentor for people seeking help with their online addiction. But yeah, why don't you tell us a bit more about yourself? Like, what do you do outside of your professional life and for your professional life?
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Cameron. So primarily I'm a husband and a father. I've got a soon-to-be a teenage son. And so that consumes most of my time outside of my profession. In the past, I've been involved with Scouts. I was a river guide for years. Worked in different places, including Mozambique, Johannesburg, South Coast and Natal. So I've been around a little bit. My professional capacity is as a digital wellness consultant and addiction recovery coach. I've got my own personal journey of addiction recovery from pornography, and that's been about the last 11 years now. So yeah, I help families understand the impact of being online, what the neurophysiological impact, the physical impact, the social impact, and then obviously the psychological impact is as well. And then helping people to improve their relationship with their devices. I think, as you were saying, there's a lot of people that are either going for a total ban or a total overuse, but actually ultimately it's not the platform that's the problem, it's how we're using it. So I often use the analogy, I can use my phone as a hammer, but it's not going to be very effective. And I'll need a new phone, and probably won't get the nail into the wood either, but ultimately I could use that, but it's how I use it is going to determine what impact it has on my life. So from a worldview perspective, it's very much a case of let's take back responsibility and ownership of how we're doing things, and but doing that with our eyes wide open, being aware that the social media wave has basically picked us up, taken us for a couple of years now, and no one was prepared for what was going to happen. And my generation didn't grow up with digital media. That was something that became introduced to us in the early 2000s, and especially since 2007 with the iPhone and the App Store, when all of a sudden everything was freely available. Life has changed radically, and so we've got to just take a couple of steps back and go, let's reset and see how we do this in a healthy way.
Yeah, I love that message, and it speaks to what we're trying to do here. And how did you get involved with Tech Bear Online?
So my brother-in-law is my business partner. He started serving friends that were in Sex Addicts Anonymous meetings and dealing with pornography as a struggle. And he's a techie, so he loves technology, he loves to see how to use it. So he found ways to help moderate and manage their devices for them, to be able to restrict access to inappropriate content that would be unhelpful for their journey of healing. And so a couple of years ago, so Charles has been doing that for about 10 years now, and then about 3 years ago he decided he wanted to try and set this up as a professional service. And I was looking for work at the time, and obviously our relationship as brothers-in-law was helpful, but I've also got a pastoral background and a bit of counselling as well, so it was a case of going, well, how do I build this? And so while he's got a full-time job doing recruitment in the engineering sector, I picked up Tech Bear and started running with that. Initially it was just addiction recovery, and then started spreading out to helping families to understand the impact, and then how to parent in a digital age when most of us weren't children in a digital age. And then from there we've gone into schools now as well. So we do talks with kids as well as with parents, and then help schools manage the way that they're engaging their digital platforms in education, recognizing that they can't just separate what happens in school to what happens at home, because what happens at home is going to affect what happens in the classroom, and what happens in the classroom is going to affect what happens at home. So within that space, my journey came through from both having some experience in this from my personal journey, but then also doing a lot of research into the scope of the digital world based on my healing that I needed to do. So my personal journey of recovery from addiction, and saying how do we help other people in the space. And that's how Take Me Online developed to what it is now.
Cool. Love that. So from what I get is that it started off, as you said, as a porn addiction service, and then it's moved to families. And I would like to know, like, how has it moved to people seeking like help from their phone consuming them just from normal life, from it didn't start off as porn, but now I feel like it's moved over to people consuming too much news, too much media. Like, how has your service and business moved to that? And if people reach out for those reasons too, right?
Yeah.
And also how would you define addiction?
So let's so from the initial thing, so porn is where we started, because that was the personal journey. But the reality is that people are becoming addicted to, as you said, social media. I mean, it's news and information gathering, gaming. And the reality is addiction is the same generally across all platforms. So whether it's substance abuse or whether it's a digital addiction, people are addicted to shopping, they're addicted to gym, they're addicted to surfing, they're addicted to food. And so there's always a deeper hurt, pain, or escapism that's being pursued. And we've seen with just the ease of access with our phones, addiction is becoming more easily accessible. The reality as well is that the social media companies, starting with Facebook or the Meta group, and then Snapchat, Instagram, WhatsApp, YouTube, TikTok, Discord, all of those platforms have actually studied and taken the principles of addiction and applied it to their products in order to keep us online for longer. And so we've been subtly groomed into addiction without realizing it. And so people's lives have changed radically without them knowing, because of how gradual this change has been. What we're seeing is it's obviously affecting mental health, people's image of themselves, their understanding of themselves and the world, the way they view relationships has changed, the way we deal with relationships, the way we engage emotionally is changed, the sense of values has changed. We're seeing physical changes. I mean, there's an official diagnosis of something called tech neck, which is affecting people. We're seeing digital eye strain. We're seeing the delayed reading skills amongst children that have been exposed from too young. Peripheral vision's being shifted. There's unfortunately now as well a screen-induced erectile dysfunction amongst porn users, guys that can no longer have a physical erection in response to a physical partner. We're seeing screen-induced insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes amongst children who are gaming, and they're spending all their time eating lots of carbs, drinking lots of energy drinks and high caffeinated sugary drinks, but they're not moving, and so that's impacting them physically, which obviously is going to impact their sense of worth, their value, self-esteem, which affects their social life, which affects the depression, anxiety. All those things are skyrocketing. There's a great book by Dr. Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation, and in that he's showing the correlation between the rise of social media with the rise of anxiety, depression, self-harming, and suicidal ideations amongst preteens and teens. And so all of the stats, all the science, all the research is showing that addiction is something that we are become normal. But the question is, are we recognizing it, and are we taking the measures in our own lives to shift from that? I think when it comes to understanding addiction, we've got to recognize that it's linked with the neurotransmitting chemical called dopamine, which naturally occurs in our brains. It's what we need for transferring information from one motor neuron to the next. The problem is when we are constantly stimulated with excessive amounts of information, stimulation, variety, and novelty, we are flooding our prefrontal cortexes, which changes our dopamine and our reward system. So we no longer get satisfied with things that used to interest us. Now all of a sudden it's what's quick, what's easily accessible, what doesn't take any effort, and then within that we lose control because our brains are becoming groomed or conditioned to respond to certain stimulation and not others anymore. And so every swipe on a catalog of shopping, or every change of a YouTube Shorts video or a Instagram account. I mean, let's face it, no one's just looked at one Instagram page and gone, I'm good. It's always the next one, that's the next one. I mean, you look at dating now, it's swiping. People are struggling to develop relationships offline. And so there's all these impacts that are happening, and we haven't realized it until we actually lift our heads up out of society and go, wait a minute, what's happening? Taking a step back, had a look in again, and said, right, things need to change. But it's not all bad, because there's a lot of usefulness with digital tech. There's a lot of people, for example, on the neurodiverse spectrum that are finding it easier to communicate and are feeling more connected because they don't have to interpret emotional cues on a text message. But then you've got other people who are reading in emotional cues into a text message and breaking down. So we need to have a look at how is it useful in individual cases, but then as this conversation started around excess, how do we moderate our time online? How do we make sure we're engaging in both online and offline activities in a healthy manner? And how do we recognize that? The question you asked towards the end was around how do we recognize addiction? Well, one is,
how do you define it all?
So an addiction is generally understood as not being able to stop even despite the knowledge of the negative consequences. So that's the most simplest form or definition. If I can't stop, even though I know this is bad for me, then I know I'm addicted.
Okay, cool. I spoke to you about this a bit yesterday, but do you believe in, or do you acknowledge the term functioning addict?
Functioning addict
Like
is...
a functioning alcoholic. Yes,
so a functioning alcoholic is someone who has an alcohol addiction but still manages to get through most of life. I don't generally accept the term, and this is a personal position. I'm not speaking for everyone in my field, but addiction is generally a coping mechanism for the struggles of life or an escapism, and often it's a way of trying to self-medicate pain. If we're looking at how functional we are while we're acting out and using our addictive behavior, that can often just be a form of justification to maintain what we're doing. So I went through years of justifying and giving reason for doing what I was doing. All valid, legitimate reasons, but it didn't solve the problem. So I had to get to the root of that. I had to find out why I got to where I was. What were the deeper needs that I actually needed? What were the values that I was trying to meet? And when I could deal with that, then I could break the addictive behavior, and now I can use new skills in dealing with life so that I don't go back to addictive behavior. The temptation's always there. We live in my addiction was pornography, so we're living in a hypersexualized world. It doesn't matter where I go, there's almost always going to be something sexual or alluring or attractive or seductive. So I've got to manage myself differently. The danger with terms like a functional addict is that it denies the actual impact.
100%. Okay, thank you, man. And yes, we've been a bit gloomy about internet and consumption of media. Just a quick, I mean, that's what this talk is about, but just a quick, like, you know, the benefits and the positive of the internet. Maybe we can just acknowledge that, you know, like, as you said yesterday, thanks to the internet, we're both digital nomads, that we could connect. And, like, for me, the benefit for me is connecting with my friends and learning and seeing stories. But then, like, I think, you know, this can turn negative when we consume too much. Like, do you know when there's a point where it's like, okay, this is too much? I guess another way to answer that is, like, how do we, like, limit ourselves? But do you know when there's, like, a turning point where, like, this connecting, this story has gone too much consumption, you know?
So I think this comes back to the dopamine levels. If you come offline, you go from having a dopamine high to a dopamine deficit, which means that instead of our brain receiving all this pleasurable boost, we go into little depressions and anxieties. You'll find that if you've been online for a while and you come offline, you actually you might have a little bit of a brain fog. You might be a little bit cranky, grumpy, lonely. And that's generally seen. Dr. Trish Lee uses that term, the dopamine deficit. And it's just understanding what our bodies are going through. Because when we're online, it's not just the dopamine we're receiving, it's also adrenaline. We see something that we get excited about, something we like, and we get the little boost of adrenaline. We see something that scares us or causes us a bit of anxiety or disgust, and then cortisol gets released. And so our bodies are getting flooded with all these chemicals. But then when we're feeling down, we go back to the same place that we want to get our pleasurable thing from. So we go back online to get the dopamine hit. And so that's what's happening in a neurobiological perspective. So when it comes to being online, we don't generally know how to self-regulate, because that part of our brain in our prefrontal cortex, which does regulation and moderation and consequences, when it gets flooded with dopamine, that part of the functioning starts slowing down. So it's very difficult to recognize at what point am I on for too long. If it's impacting your relationships, your other responsibilities, your physical health, if it's becoming your primary way of communicating rather than a supportive way of communicating, then you might want to start taking a look at, how am I doing on this? Maybe I need to take a step back. If I'm not meeting up with my friends and we're only communicating through video chats and through WhatsApp messages, that's a problem. Because we're made to be connected. We're designed that way. Our nervous systems co-regulate off each other when we're in the same space. We know that, for example, when two people embrace, there's a release of oxytocin, which is a connecting, bonding chemical, and we see that at birth, in natural birth with children. We see that when two people make love and there's a climax, that gets released as well. We see that when, as I said, when you pat your dog, you get all these positive, good, healthy chemicals being released. When you're online, you don't have that side of human life and human existence, human being actually happening. And so when we start replacing humanity with machines, apart from sounding like a really weird Hollywood movie, Terminator-esque, we're actually losing out on our humanity again. So, I mean, Cameron, you were responding or highlighting the fact that this conversation's happened because we were both sitting in a coffee shop working remotely. We're filming this in digital technology. We're recording this with digital technology. The information that's out there is easily accessible now, whereas in the past you'd have to go and sit in libraries and sort through books and trying to find the information that you needed to find. We can find that easily now. So the ease of access for information is fantastic. The ease of communication. I mean, we're looking at just the number of my friends who've got they're overseas and their parents are still in South Africa, they can at least video call them. That was never an option in the past. So those are all good things. I've got friends whose kids only see their grandchildren or only see their grandparents once every 2 or 3 years, but they at least get to see them through video chatting. So that's all great stuff. We can learn things. I mean, my son watches a lot of YouTube, and it's the Mark Robers and he watches all sorts of interesting. He also watches other stuff. It's absolute rubbish in my opinion. But I mean, the point is he's got access to things, and it's about moderating, setting boundaries, both time and content, about what's healthy, recognizing that it's going to affect the way we see each other, the way we see the world. Also, the other side of it, we're sitting in Muizenberg at the moment. We've got beautiful scenery around us. There's the clouds, there's the cold, there's the sea smell. But when we're online, we don't activate all our senses. When we're living an analog life, predominantly, we're activating more senses. We're developing new neurological pathways. And in a healthier way, we're slowing down our dopamine releases, which means that we can actually develop in a healthier, moderate way. So absolutely, the digital world has changed for the good and for the negative, and we need to take a step and go, right, what do I want to take out of this, and what do I want to leave behind? It's the same with culture. I've had to look at my historical culture, my heritage, and go, well, what do I leave behind? I'm a white male South African. There's a whole lot of stuff I've had to look at. What was I groomed to be? I mean, I missed conscription by a year and a half. Quite happy about that, knowing what our military was being used for. So there's certain things that I look back and go, right, what can I learn from other cultures? What can I learn from other spaces? The digital world gives me the platform to do that. And then I've got to choose what I do with it. And I think those are the kind of things we can look at.
No, that's cool. I'll ask you a bit later on like how we can do that, and maybe how you do that with your clients. But I think like online internet addiction has been around for a while. Like the internet's been around, I think, since the 2000s. But like what I'm quite interested in bringing awareness is this kind of TikTok addiction.
Yes.
Like, you know, Instagram Reels came out in 2020, which made everything TikTok. You know, Facebook, YouTube. And TikTok was out before that, but people didn't want to download it. But now it's here, and it's not going to go away. And I feel like I remember Instagram being far less grabbing back then. And, you know, I sometimes wish I could turn off the recommendation algorithm or alter it. But it's a double-edged sword, because it serves chunk violence, soft porn, but it can also inspire and educate. I just want to know, like, what's your take specifically on like short-form content, doom scrolling, and addiction with short-form content?
So, as I mentioned earlier, that those social media platforms intentionally engineered the product to be addictive. So, short-form scrolling is literally about dopamine boosts. On their side, it's about keeping us online for as long as possible to feed us the information that's going to change the way we see ourselves, the world, each other, the way we spend our money, the way we change our values, the way we vote, the way we make decisions. So moderating intentional usage of that kind of platform means to moderate by going, I'm only going to spend 10 minutes, or I'm only going to spend 5 minutes. If you think of how many 15 or 30 second videos you can watch in 10 minutes, it's a heck of a lot. And so if I'm intentional about how I'm using those platforms, what am I searching for, as opposed to doom scrolling or just sitting and following what's next in the feed, we're taking back control of our lives. Because at the moment, if we're just doom scrolling, if we're just following the next recommendation, that algorithm's going to carry on being developed by everything we look at. So all you need to do is be on a video for 2 seconds, and that's informed the algorithm. And so something that might be interesting, even though it's not relevant to you, all of a sudden changes your algorithm. And we need to be aware of the way that that's functioning. Ironically, it's also based on the way our brain functions. The more we see something, the more we hear something, the more we experience something, the more normal it becomes, the more of a default it is. So when I do this kind of discussion in schools, I'll say to the kids, what's 2 times 2? And they go 4 very quickly. I go, right, 7 times 8. And they'll go 56. I said, when you were in grade 1 or 2, how hard were those sums to do? And they're going, well, now they had to work quite hard. They had to think quite hard. By grade 3 and 4, it's automatic. And it's the same is true for whatever we're taking on board through what we're seeing. So these short platforms or short video feeds, the reality is that just because everyone can make a TikTok video or a YouTube video, it doesn't mean everyone should. Because despite the creativity that goes into it, not everything out there is helpful or valuable. You got people that are using their 15 seconds of fame to try and get a following, but what's the value? Are we teaching critical thinking skills by the way we engaging with the content of those videos? It's one of the things I'm trying with my son. Whenever he sees something, we're going, well, don't just accept that that's true. Let's go and validate it. Let's go and research what are the sources. Especially with artificial intelligence development now as well. That also changes the game. So we've got to teach the skills of going, how can I trust this, or can I trust this? Which obviously also causes anxiety. So we need to come back to the whole thing of what do we follow, where are our values, and how are we interpreting what we're receiving through our value system? Because that's being shifted. Language is being shifted, and morality is being shifted. And it's good, I believe it's good to challenge everything. But when we see the value behind something, that's what we should be basing our decisions on. If I'm just consuming a ton of short videos from anyone in the world who's got a wide variety of values that are different to me, and those start becoming my norm, I've allowed myself to be influenced rather than to moderate, to filter, to discern what's actually most valuable to me.
Like, what are your thoughts on people's urgency to limit themselves? Because I feel like there's a lack of urgency. Like, I speak to pretty much everyone. Like, I always ask them, like, how's your phone use? Some people say, I spent 5 hours on TikTok the other day. And like, I just don't feel like there's an urgency. Do you maybe just want to speak on that urgency? And
Cameron, what I'm loving about this conversation is firstly just the sense of let's raise awareness. Most people aren't aware, even when they see the facts of their own usage, because they don't want to acknowledge that it has an impact in their life. So for someone spending 5 hours on TikTok, what responsibilities have they missed? What self-care have they abandoned? What relationships have suffered? Those kind of things come in to play. So speaking from my own personal experience, when I was in my active porn addiction, I could spend 5 or 6 hours online, but then I wasn't doing what I should have been doing. My relationship with my family suffered. I would be grumpy when I wasn't online. So that obviously affected relationships as well. It's those things of neglecting to mow the lawn or wash the dishes or doing those kind of things, not sleeping properly because I'd want to be online. And if we apply the same principle, the contents might be different. So we might be talking about social media rather than pornography. But the point is that when it's taking you away from what's healthy and you keep justifying going back because it's not affecting anyone else. But how do you know that? Because we become so insular in our understanding of what our world is and what we want it to be that we don't recognize our impact with other people. If I can use an example from a school presentation I did, when I asked the question about parents setting the example of device usage. And one grade 5 mom turned around and said, my daughter asked me why I don't look at her when she speaks to me. The mom wasn't aware that the impact of how she was using her device. So she'd carry on texting, scrolling, while her daughter was speaking to her. And for the daughter, that was a sign of rejection. That was a sign of going, whatever's on your phone is more important to you than me. And for the mom, it was at that point when she had the wake-up call of what seems innocent and relatively uncomplicated is now all of a sudden actually destroying my relationship with my daughter. So for most people, when you're in it, you don't realize it. You don't realize how hot the water's got when you're the frog that was put in the cold water and it slowly heated up. And so often it takes a digital detox, or it takes let's do a little challenge for the next couple of days. Let's see what happens if we limit ourselves. Let's see how our lives change. Let's see how our character changes, our emotions, our feelings, our sense of duty, our sense of responsibility. How irritable do I get if I'm not online? Is it the first thing I do in the morning? Is it the last thing I do at night? Is check my socials? Those kind of things. How many can I just sit and be quiet for a bit? So practicing solitude is something that we are struggling with because we're so groomed and conditioned to having stimulation all the time. One of my clients, I challenged him on this. I said to him, can you just sit for half an hour without any devices? And he battled and battled, and eventually he started training himself to do that. Now he can sit without having to look at a device, without having to listen to a podcast or to music. He can actually sit in quiet and self-reflect. He can reflect on the world. He can do those kind of things now, but it took an intentional shift from his addiction to social media and coming to that point of recognizing the urgency of my life needs to change. And now he's healthier for it. The other thing we've got as well is, especially when it comes to, and this is the functionality again of digital technology, and after COVID, when remote working happened, when we were working from home, there was no longer a separation from the workplace to the home. So people were always at work, and a lot of people are struggling with that now because you're available till 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. Messages are coming in from clients or from the boss or from colleagues, and you feel like you have to respond then and there. One of the dads at a primary school I spoke at realized that this was impacting his family life. Runs his own business, very successful but very busy. So he took the stance of going at 5 o'clock, I switch my phone off. The only people that need to contact me then are the people I'm with, and that's my family. Everyone else can leave a message and I'll get back to them the next day. A couple of months later, I bumped into him again, and I said, how are things? He says, I'm more present with my wife. I'm more engaged with my children. I actually know what they're interested in. I'm watching more of my sons playing sport. I'm playing with them. I'm doing homework with them. I'm helping around the house. Our whole family feels less anxious. There's less conflict at home, and we're all happier and healthier together. And I have no regrets. And so he had to learn about the boundaries, that having constant access robbed him of the boundaries that he needed. Now that he's put the boundaries in place and being intentional about how he uses his device, he's much happier, healthier, his anxiety levels are lower, his stress levels are lower, and the people in his workplace are having to learn about boundaries themselves. Because when we've got our phone in our pocket and it's always on, we actually opened the door to a lot of stuff without realizing it. So that's a very long way of answering your question about the urgency, about are people aware or conscious of the need to set the boundaries and take ownership of their lives again.
Thanks, man. Kind of just towards the end, I want to move towards like your perspective of your job, as I think that's quite fascinating. Just want to know, like, how do you assist people through their digital and social media addiction?
That's a fantastic question. I think the first thing is helping people recognize where they are in terms of their relationship with their devices. So often that comes through conversation, challenging questions, asking people to reflect on where they're at. A lot of our clients arrive because they've been referred to us by counselors. So they've seen a crisis in their life and then they come to us. What we do with adults is we manage their devices for them by using parental software. And then we put filters, blockers, and time limits in place. We see what they're searching. We see their patterns and their behavior online. And then we give them a call and go, hey, how things are going, what else do you need, what help do you need. So it's always a supportive environment rather than a policing one. Nobody likes to be shamed. No one likes to feel that they're guilty of something when they're trying to change their lives. So our approach is, how do we support you going forward in you taking ownership and responsibility for your life and helping you upskill yourself to be able to do that. With families, we help parents understand the impact and then teach them how to use monitoring and management software. And that's everything from understanding that it's actually a good idea to not be in front of a screen an hour before bedtime because it affects your sleep patterns. It helps by teaching parents what happens if a child's been gaming and all of a sudden you take the game away. Why do they have a tantrum? And that's all because of the adrenaline, cortisol, and dopamine. So helping parents with those kind of skills to be able to change the way they parent, change their relationship with their kids, to embrace the space, to understand the kids' digital world. So I'm a Gen Xer, which means we grew up with a myriad of devices, and each device had one function. My son is growing up with one device having all those functions. And so there's a generational gap in the way that our understanding of things. And so I've got to get into his world. I've got to learn about what's happening in his realm. I've got to understand that for his generation, a device is an extension of themselves because it's their primary form of contact with their friends. And say, right, how else can we contact friends? How else can we spend time together? As opposed to a yes or no answer. We also, in terms of when people approach us for help, it's finding out where they're at. What do they need? Looking at what their values are and helping them develop a value-based sense of relationship with the devices. So for one client, we're going to have a different approach to the next client because of what they need, how they need to function, and then what do they need incrementally in their lives. When it comes to porn, obviously we want to block it immediately. It's not helpful in any way for people. That could be another conversation. But we obviously block and filter that immediately, but then we help with other skills. And with social media, it's a different story because for a lot of people, there still is a functional need for social media. So how do we limit that? So we'll put time limits in place and teach people to use that intentionally. And then also helping understand what's appropriate social media and what's not. And the reality is we get sold on this whole thing. We need to be on stuff. We don't actually need. It's useful. So how do we intentionally choose what we're using and what is our purpose for being there? So that's the way we help when people come to us. But it's always about who's the person, where they're at, and then working with them from where they're at to where they want to be. And that's a journey.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm also interested in like the people and like their demographic, like what like age, country, profession. As you mentioned, there's business people, but also mothers and age range and countries. Is there a particular pattern or is it quite all over?
So in terms of the adult addicts, we've got a growing market that's developing in the Benelux countries in Belgium and the Netherlands. A lot of them are coming over to South Africa for substance abuse and other forms of addiction, behavioral addictions, and they're doing their treatment in Cape Town. So we're growing in that area, and that's everyone from 19, 20-year-olds through to 60, 70-year-olds. In terms of South Africans, primarily, as I said, we primarily dealing with porn addicts, and that's ranging from 18 through to 77. And that we've got over about 105 adult addicts whose devices we're managing. When it comes to families, we've helped probably between 50 and 60 families now. And that's essentially helping the parents because they need to take responsibility for their kids. I'll come in, I'll do a consult with the family, but then I'll leave. So it's how do we empower parents to engage with their kids and to understand how to take ownership of the device usage, because apart from loving their children, constitutionally, parents are responsible for the way the devices are being used until those children are 18 years old. So there is a legal responsibility that most people aren't aware of. So we have to look at things like privacy and versus secrecy. We've got to look at the fact that no kid owns a device in this country until they're 18, because the parents are responsible for that. So in terms of demographics, across the board, all races, all levels of socioeconomic status, from people who we do pro bono work for because they can't afford the support, to people who are living in 60 million rand mansions. So the reality is that we're all human, and digital addiction is going to affect everyone, and it doesn't choose. So yeah, men, women, mostly, especially in terms of pornography, majority men, although the statistics are saying about 70 to 80% of men are struggling with porn, and 40% of women are regular porn users. And so within that, majority of our clients are men at this stage. But I can see that's going to grow in the other way. The other side, as well as the gambling, is more women coming through on gambling. Social media and shopping is more generally women. Pornography, gaming, more men.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just like I think two more points. Last 2 points. Like, how could someone, like right now, help themselves limit their consumption? Like, what would be the best ways? Like, is there any apps? What I'm doing is accountability. I think you've mentioned that's a good way. And then maybe like contrast that with talking about like, there's always ways of getting around this. And like, I think what you mentioned yesterday is like, you need to start with an internal motivation and awareness first.
So the internal motivation and awareness is the starting point, because it's ultimately not about the device. It's about us. It's us taking responsibility for our lives and how we're choosing to live our lives. So that comes back down to, what do we value? And if we have grown up into an addictive space, we don't necessarily know what we value. And so that's where the conversation comes in. That's why this kind of discussion is fantastic. So that's the starting point. If we're recognizing that there's something not right in our lives, that's an indicator. If we're constantly feeling down, isolated, removed, if we're becoming more dependent on our devices for our sense of well-being and our social interaction, then we need to maybe just take a step back and check things out. As far as controls are concerned, I mean, you mentioned accountability. It's always good to do stuff with people, because this is a journey, any addiction recovery journey, but life is a journey with people. We're made as relational beings. Otherwise, we would never be born. There would never be families. There would never be those kind of things. So there would never be friendships. So this is the kind of thing that we should journey together. So having an accountability partner that we can, or bunch of friends, and say, let's just check in with each other. How are you doing? Every single device now, just about from Android to Apple, has got a screen time management system built in terms of monitoring your usage. So you can always use that to check how much time you're spending online. If you need to put restrictions in place, there are a couple of different apps that can be used. Usually they're managed by someone other than yourself. The reason for that is because you can always just switch them off. So we used Custodio, which is a parenting app for managing our adult clients. And then we also use another app called MobiSip, which is a little bit more difficult to bypass. So depending on the level of IT skills of our clients, and depending also on the degree of their addiction, we'll choose one of those two. Apple users have got Apple Screen Time, and you can always put limitations on and get someone else to put in the screen time pin so that you can't override those. So there's always ways to, if you've got someone that you can trust to do this with you, you get their screen pin and they get your screen pin. Family Link is a great tool from Google. It's a free Google app. The thing is that there's always going to be ways to get around stuff. So Apple, for example, don't work well with. They don't want to play with other companies well. So if you could bypass Apple using certain Google products. So in that kind of front, then you need to make sure that you've taken Chrome off your device and you're only using Safari. If you're on an Android, then it's a lot easier to manage because of the parenting softwares and controls are generally go across all platforms. The other thing you need to be aware of is, people are going to try and bypass using VPNs. So as much as a VPN is useful and it can help you get a lot of free stuff and access to other streaming sources, from a safety perspective, it's not helpful. So then it's the question of what's more important to me, my physical and mental well-being or the ease of access to content. So the digital landscape's changing constantly, and so we need to be aware that as much as we can put things in place, ultimately it comes back to the user, not the device. But we can make our devices safer, not entirely safe, but safer, in order to help us, so we don't have to do as much thinking, and we can focus on changing our day-to-day. So we develop a new normal. So from an addictive normal to a recovered normal, from an unhealthy normal to a healthier normal. And that might take a while. But if we're intentional about doing it, we'll see good results. And if we're honest with the people that we're accountable to, we'll also see good results.
And another one is, how else can we stay informed and entertained without scrolling? First thing that comes to mind is reading and podcasts. Do you advocate for that to your clients?
Absolutely. So the thing with reading, try and find books rather than reading online. So what you're doing is you're breaking the link between yourself and the device. So the device isn't the platform that you're primarily getting your responses from, or your dopamine and your pleasure responses. So get back into reading books. Do more analog activities, analog being non-digital. Do things physically. Engage with other hobbies. Instead of playing chess online, play chess on a board. Play cards and board games. Get out, surf, walk, hike, run, cycle, do those kind of things. So, and do things with other people. Cook. Take an interest in things that aren't going to be bound to a digital platform. Podcasts are great for information, but also what's happening now is that you're not getting the visual stimulation. You're hearing information and you're discerning it that way. If you're watching a video, you generally end up you can easily get just caught up in the same kind of process. So for example, one of my clients was addicted to gaming and pornography. When he stopped gaming, it made not going to porn a lot easier because the two were so similar in terms of the platform that was being used. So being able to break from the sense of picking up my device and getting into the ritual of addiction. I'm picking up my device, I'm clicking on Netflix, but if I'm clicking on Pornhub, I'm getting the same thing immediately. So breaking those rituals in addictive behavior is really helpful. So analog activities are a really good way to do that. So not saying that you can't watch Netflix. It's just a case of you've got to break the ritual from the one to the other so that your brain can develop new neurological pathways and go, okay, I'm going to expect to get a pleasure response from opening up the cupboard and pulling out a book, or going to the library, or meeting up with a friend for coffee, as opposed to the only way I'm getting pleasurable content or entertainment is through picking up my phone or opening my laptop or on my tablet. So it's more than just the content, it's the process that develops into building expectations from our brain. And I remember early days of my addiction recovery, one of the therapists that I was seeing told us about how studies were being done where people were just scrolling or clicking on a mouse or a mouse pad with nothing on the screen, and they were measuring the dopamine reception that was happening. And every time they clicked, there would be a dopamine boost because the brain had been conditioned to, when you click, it's Pavlov's dog thing. When you click, you're expecting to see something. And so we need to just break that ritual to be able to take control and find new ways of enjoying life.
Yeah, last question. Thanks for your time, and I really appreciate it. Just wanted to ask, like, any stories of people that you've helped recover from online addiction, which you have mentioned, the business partner or the businessman, the family man, and the guy who you got to get him to sit for 30 minutes. Do you have any other stories that come to mind? And yeah, if not, any last thoughts for the video?
Sure. So I mean, there's plenty of examples of. I've just got to obviously maintain confidentiality here. I've got a client that was suicidal, is no longer, was isolated and is now actually being able to connect with people. Another client who is gotten to the point where he couldn't feel. He had lost the sense and the ability to have emotions. So his partner would say things to him and he would not be able to respond. But 3 months later, he's full of joy and he can express emotions and he can cry again. He hadn't cried in years. And because of being able to break that, his addiction, I mean, he's still in recovery and he's still journeying one day at a time, but being able to break that addiction meant he could feel again, which made him feel human again, which helped him with his sense of value as a person, which helped him develop empathy towards his partner, where she would do stuff or say something and he wouldn't have a response. Now all of a sudden he can. So his humanity is being restored. Got another client who has just he's busy trying to organize his engagement, and now the whole sense of secrecy and privacy is a struggle for him, because when he was being secretive and private in the past, it was to do dodgy things. Now all of a sudden it's so that he can arrange a fantastic engagement opportunity. So his sense of value has shifted. There was another family whose child was really struggling at school, academically, when they started putting limitations and moderation in play for how much time that this kid was spending online. All of a sudden his marks shot up by 10% overall, which has given him a greater sense of self-worth. So his self-esteem has grown, his confidence has grown. So in those kind of fronts, it's been really helpful. So yeah, there's that's just a few of the stories, but it's definitely it's always been positive going forward, and a healing process. I've seen both with kids and adults being able to embrace life more fully, being more active, being more present. That's the two words that I use often when I'm doing addiction recovery coaching, is be present. Especially when it comes to being reminded constantly of what you were, what you did, as opposed to who you are now, which means that we're no longer defined by our actions of the past, but by who we are as a person. And then we can develop so that our actions are an expression of who we are, as opposed to what we were. I think one of the last things, just as an example, is some of the kids that I've worked with through the schools, just shifting from changing who they are so they can fit in, because that's the biggest issue actually, for especially amongst teenagers and early teens, is they don't want to be left out. They want to feel they belong to something. And so they start changing who they are because of what's expected of them online, and then they get accepted. When they can start realizing that actually, if I'm changing who I am so that I can be accepted, it's not me that's being accepted, it's the change. It's the add-on. And what happens if I start being authentically me again? Will I still be accepted? And so seeing that anxiety and tension drop in certain children, and that's from chatting to their parents, because they start realizing they don't have to do what everyone else is doing. That's shifted. Seeing one family where the relationship between parents and children changed because the parents could understand that switching off the Wi-Fi wasn't the best option. But actually engaging and giving the kids time and space to moderate and reset when they came off gaming was helpful. So there's tons of stories like that. But ultimately, I think that one of the greatest expressions was one of my clients who used to be a gaming addict, went away for a weekend with the guys he used to game with. And they were all addicted to gaming. And he went back relationally. And they were all still stuck in their ways. And he turned around and he said, just looking at and listening to conversations, he said he can't believe how much more at peace he is and how much more free he is. And how happier he is by not being in that world anymore. And that sense of peace was what motivates him now to take the next step. So he'll get back into gaming, but he's going to limit his gaming. And it's a case of putting time limits in play and choosing more intentionally on what games he's going to play. So it's so there's a lot of those great stories coming through. Yeah.
Another question that just came to my mind: when you say the word gaming, can that be replaced with porn addiction, short form content? And do you have an opinion on what might be the strongest grab or the strongest detriment to people? And for me, I feel like short form content is a unique one because it's so normalized, and it's kind of unshamed in a way, so people do it out and free. So maybe just talk about that and which one you think is maybe the most detrimental.
Sure. I think it all depends on the individual, because each person's using their devices for their own purposes in different ways. So I think the danger with short form content is the rapid releases of dopamine and how easy it is to just get stuck in that space without realizing it. The old saying of time flies when we're having fun is very apt for this. So I think short form media can be very dangerous because of the amount of information we're receiving, which our brains aren't really conditioned to dealing with. So everything we see, everything we touch, everything we hear and smell forms a neurological pathway. And if we've got that much content coming through that's unrelated to the previous thing or the next thing, we're just establishing a myriad or this massive network of new neurological pathways that are going to sit there and exhaust us and change the way we think. I like the fact that you said that it's normalized, so people don't think of it as in the I don't want to say the negative way, but in a concerned awareness. So short form media is dangerous because of how addictive it is, and because it's normalized, because it's trending. It's easy. Gaming can have the same impact because of the amount of novelty, movement, and stimulation that's coming from the screen. You play a first-person shooter game, you're always aware. You've got the amount of adrenaline that's pumping through you, the amount of cortisol that's pumping through you. That's all going to change your behavior. Your body doesn't necessarily pick up that it's a game because it makes you feel like you're under threat. And when you speak to teenagers and kids now when they're gaming and their parents want to tell them to stop, they're going, but the only way I can stop this game is if I die. And that's the language they'll use. It's not that my character will die or my avatar will die or and then I can respawn or come back in later. I'm going to die. And that sounds ridiculous on one level, but for the kid, that's their world. So it's difficult to say which one's more damaging, but I definitely think the awareness of the impact of short form media needs to be raised. It's interesting that TikTok came out with their 15 seconds, Reels came in, Shorts came in, and now WhatsApp have got their feeds that you can follow. And it's all the same thing. It's to keep us addicted, to keep us online. Anyone that's trying to force me into an addiction, I can't trust. So I've got to be able to take ownership and responsibility of my life. And so on that front, I think they all have potential danger and they all have potential value. But I've got to see what's impacting me most. So I'm not on any social media anymore, and don't miss it. My wife's on Instagram. She'll go through and look at a whole lot of stuff, and occasionally she'll see something that might interest me and she'll show it to me. But I don't miss it. I feel happier, freer. I've got more time. I don't get as distracted as I used to. So just speaking from a personal perspective, that's where I'm at. When it comes to gaming, I enjoy playing certain games with my son, but then it's a helpful value because we're doing something together. But if I'm not gaming, it's not an issue for me. But seeing what he's involved with and being involved in his world is important to me. Pornography, obviously there's the excitement of it, there's the novelty of it, there's the rush that it brought, but I'm not willing to pay the cost for that anymore. And I've seen too much damage done in my own life, in my own relationship with my family, the impact that that's had on other people in my sphere of influence, and working with adult addicts who are in desperate spaces. The allure and the excitement of it is not worth the cost that it's going to, when that bill comes up, the life bill, I don't want to pay that. So yeah, I think we need to be aware all of it's dangerous. Short form media is definitely probably the most easily accessible and most addictive, and it's intentionally designed to do that. So
and people unintentionally go on there. That's the unique thing about it. And I guess that's what we just wanted to chat about. And thank you for chatting. Thank you for being vulnerable and brave to talk about your process. And I commend and applaud your professional work.
thank you.
Thanks, man.
Pleasure. I think the more we talk about it, let's normalize speaking about the struggles of life. Let's normalize finding ways to support each other. Because in all forms of addiction, when people realize they're addicted, generally they feel isolated. And there's the shame, there's the performance anxiety of life going, I don't have it all together. All of a sudden something happened, I don't realize how I got here, but I'm here. And no one wants to feel weak, no one wants to feel vulnerable, as opposed to recognizing the strength in vulnerability, because then we can see what we need to work on. If we can avoid the judgment and the pointing fingers and the blaming, playing the blame game and all that kind of stuff, and go, you know what, here's someone that's willing to volunteer that they're in a tough space and they need help. Let's support them. Let's help each other. Let's recognize when we don't see our own weaknesses and other people might see them in us. We'll see the weaknesses in their lives. How do we support each other and journey together stronger? So the more we talk about stuff, the more, and that's why I'm quite open about my story, because for too long it's been accepted that if someone's got a substance abuse problem, that's more acceptable than someone that's got a porn addiction. And the denial of the reality of social media addiction is, we're just burying our heads in the sand, trying to avoid taking responsibility because we don't want to inconvenience our lives by saying, maybe I need to change my habits. and then I've got to start recognizing that I don't have. I've allowed myself into a space, but then also we don't have to judge that because most people aren't aware that this is what's happened until they realize the consequences. So let's keep the conversation going. Let's carry on chatting with each other. I mean, you guys as friends discussing this, maybe doing challenges with each other. I know Cameron's doing his own challenge of moderating his time online. So yeah, have little challenges where you have detox times when you go away together for a weekend or whatever, and just put your phones away. Where you have those spaces where you go, right, let's go and do something else together, and through that way, as a community of friends, changing your culture, and then influencing the people around you through showing the difference and the change, because it's a cultural phenomenon now, and we need to shift that.
Thank you.